In the infant days of 1962, we besieged the travel agencies, counted our pennies, and after much discussion, decided to make the Isle of Man the venue for our summer holiday that year. Joyce was no stranger to the place, having been there for a holiday soon after the war, but I had only seen its dim outline from the mainland. We chose a week in the latter half of June, hoping to get the maximum of sunshine and daylight. It turned out that sunshine was somewhat unreliable, but we made full use of the daylight. Our journey there was by train and boat. It was necessary to change trains at Manchester, and so, having half an hour to kill before the Liverpool connection departed, we decided to have a deco around the neighbourhood. In our wanderings, we found ourselves in Albert Square, where I was tempted to bag this shot. The weather at this time was normal Mancunian, dull and drizzly. We had planned our holiday to start on the Friday, so that we could stay the night in Liverpool and have time to look around the city and its environs, and most of all, to visit its famous cathedral. Hopes of photographing the interior of the cathedral faded as we went inside, as the light was very poor. Preparations for a service were in a very advanced state, so I put away my tripod and contented myself with this view of the exterior. It's a beautiful Gothic-style building constructed of a warm-coloured stone and of breathtaking proportions. During our stay in Liverpool, we paid a visit to New Brighton. The weather was cool and breezy, but nevertheless sunny. I thought these little boats were worth an exposure. This is the pier, with the ferry passing behind it to the landing stage. Hello, Big Head. Saturday morning saw us down on the landing stage in good time for the steamer, which was to take us to Kelly's Isle. Here we are taking stock of the other side of the river. Our boat was away very promptly, and Liverpool was soon drawing away from us. We are now passing the Birkenhead landing stage. You will see we have an air escort. The boat was very crowded, but we found a place on deck aft. As it was a sunny morning and we were heading into a westerly wind, we found it the most sheltered part of the ship. As we approached Douglas, we saw a halo around the sun and the weather deteriorated. Just our luck, we thought. Coming in closer to the harbour, we can see the Douglas Head Lighthouse and, further up the head, a small green and white building which is a camera obscura. Leaving the docks, we paused to get a view of the Lady of Man, which brought us from Liverpool. Since Douglas is the most important town on the island, perhaps we should show some pictures of this place first. These shots were taken at various times during the week. This is an evening view of the harbour, showing a few of the quite considerable fleet of vessels which keep the island in touch with the rest of the world. This is the children's model yachting pool on a part of the very extensive front at Douglas. The Isle of Man has its own peculiar forms of transport. This is one of the many horse trams which ply along the front. There is an electric tramway running along the northeast coast from Douglas to Laxey and Ramsey. It has both open and closed rolling stock, the former being very draughty on a windy day. The only steam railway still running on the island is a narrow gauge one, its wooden coaches being anything but luxurious. It connects Douglas with Port Erin and Castletown. Like most holiday resorts, Douglas has many amusement arcades. As you can see, Allen and Sixpence are soon parted. Our stay in the Isle of Man coincided with Modern Dance Week, and it was here at the Villa Marina where the competitions were held. This is the open-air bandstand in the grounds of the Villa Marina, and at the time we were listening to Ivy Benson and her band. Whilst Mum and Dad lay back in their deck chairs listening to the band, Junior had his own show a short distance away, put on by Auntie Betty and Uncle Roy. We parents admired the way they kept the kiddies entertained for almost 2 hours. They certainly had something we hadn't got. Here is a little shopping arcade on the promenade, very handy if it rains. On our way down to the front, we saw this very pleasant shelter overlooking some rose gardens. The roof is of plastic, which gives something of a sunny effect even when the sun is not actually shining. One day we had a walk around Douglas Head and came across an open-air show. When this was taken, the show had just ended and the Queen was being played. At the other end of Douglas, that is the north end, rises Onshaw Head, where we found this secluded little cove. Note the legs of a skeleton which some wag has painted on the cliff face. Being encouraged by previous attempts at night photography, I was very keen to record Douglas by night, so grabbing my camera and tripod, we sallied forth about 10:45 p.m. when the sun had just set but the sky was still light. We found it very chilly, but think it was well worth it. This shot and the next could almost be placed side by side to get a wide panorama. Douglas Bay, of course, is a very big one. This street scene is near the harbour end of the promenade. We are now looking south towards the docks. From about midway along the promenade, the red object is an old mine used as a collecting box for lifeboat charities. Turning in the opposite direction and looking towards Onshaw Head, you can see the War Memorial on your right and the Villa Marina with the green lighting on the front on the left of the picture. We will now leave Douglas, and a short distance to the north, reached by road or electric tramway, we find Groudle Glen, one of the numerous beautiful little glens around the coast of the island. Owing to lack of time, we only visited 2 of these. These palms are evidence of the normally mild climate which the Manx people enjoy. The glen eventually finds its way down to the sea. Having got thus far, we climbed a path up the steep side of the glen to get this view of the rugged coastline. An alternative way of traversing the glen was by this miniature railway, which we had heard rattling along on our way down the glen. Laxey is the next place of any importance along this coast. I took this shot through the window of our tram, using my fastest shutter speed as we skirted the village. One day we spent the morning on the beach at Laxey, and in exploring the rocks I came across this cave. With some difficulty I managed to scramble up to it and have a look inside. It was about 10 foot high. I went along the tunnel for some 30 or 40 feet when it turned sharp right into pitch darkness. Having no light, I deemed it prudent not to proceed further. Apart from being a pleasant seaside resort, Laxey is noted for the nearby giant water wheel, now idle, which once pumped water from lead mines. Leaving Mum and also Grandpa, who was spending the holiday with us, down below, Alan and I climbed the spiral stairway which encircles the tower to see what we could see. Not an outstanding piece of architecture, but at least somewhat colourful. During the week we had purchased runabout tickets on the electric tramway, and these included a trip up the line to the highest point on the island, Snae Fell. The mountain had been covered in cloud all week, so we had deferred our climb in the hope that things would improve. But our luck was out, for when we did eventually reach the top, there was a thick cloud, gale-force wind and driving rain. Instead of magnificent views, all we got was this depressing shot of the tram and a soaking for our trouble. Ramsey comes next along the coast. It is quite a busy little fishing port, with an extensive beach as well as a harbour. The inclement weather did not attract many people on the beach this day. Here is a part of the harbour with the fishing fleet waiting out at sea. A spell of sunshine adds a touch of freshness to this view of Ramsey. Whilst in Ramsey, we visited the local park, Morag Park. This has gardens, boating lake and the ubiquitous Crazy Golf. These cyclists from Era added colour to the scene as they negotiated the crazy golf hazards made in the form of notorious bends on the TT course. One very wet morning, we had a motor coach tour of the island and stopped for lunch at Peel. It was still raining heavily when I managed to get this record of Peel Castle, which also includes the ruins of the Abbey. Perhaps the prettiest seaside place on the island is Port Erin, with its gently shelving beach. Here we found a rather interesting fish hatchery. This is a view of the bay looking across to Bradder Head with its monument to the Milner family, the safe people. Two more shots of small craft in the harbour, always a pleasing subject. We took a stroll along the cliffs and eventually found this swimming pool, which had been carved out halfway up the cliffs. A swimming gala had been advertised for this particular afternoon, but only two intrepid girls braved the cold and dived in. On another occasion, we visited the ancient capital, Castletown. The castle, a formidable fortification, is in a very well-preserved condition. Civil courts are still held there, and in fact one was in session while we were here. One of the courtyards with a courthouse at the rear. These cannon were never used in the castle, but have been collected from other places far away. After looking round the castle, the harbour was the next to take our attention. The tide was right out, and the masses of exposed seaweed stank. As I took this photo, the sun burst through and caused me to overexpose the shot. Then swarms of flies arose from the seaweed, so we beat a hasty retreat. Not very far from Castletown, which is, by the way, on the southwest coast of the island, is Rushen Abbey. These meagre remains are now incorporated into a commercial enterprise, selling strawberry and cream teas and garden produce. There was even a jive session in an outdoor dance floor. I thought this bed of Sweet Williams made a good show, but the dull weather, it was drizzling at the time, meant that I had to use a large aperture, which restricted my depth of focus. This is a handheld shot taken at 15th of a second in one of the glass houses. Coming nearly to the end of our tour around the island and approaching Douglas, we had a look at Port Sodrick. Arriving by train from Port Erin, we alighted at this deserted station before making our way down the very pretty glen to the beach. Port Sodrick is a quiet little place set among dark grey rocks. Steps are being taken to popularise it, but since this includes a garish pin table saloon, which I deliberately omitted from my shots, I feel not for the better. The rocks around here were very rugged and impressive. See how puny these humans appear against the massive rocks. From this shot it would seem that Alan is likely to be swallowed up by some gigantic mouth. Note the formation of the rock. Our holiday was nearing its end. As our finances ebbed, we found ourselves on the rocks. This picture seems to me to have almost a 3D effect. Tripod and delayed action shutter were used for this shot. Enquiry at the dock told us that our vessel for the return journey to Liverpool would be the new car ferry, the Manx Maid, here shown in dock earlier in the week. We had delayed our return home for one more day so that we could travel on the Sunday when we thought our journey would be less crowded, and so it turned out to be. Here our ship has just backed away from the quay before heading out to sea. One last look back at Douglas Head. We of course had to make a tour of the ship, as we always do. This is the afterdeck, which is made into a spiral runway, enabling cars to be driven down into the hold. This is a view below decks. We left the island in dull, cloudy weather, but as we ploughed on through the somewhat choppy sea, the clouds rolled away and we basked in the glorious sunshine and warmth the best we had known all week.